You know the story. A girl in rags, a fairy godmother, a glass slipper, a prince. Disney told you it was a love story, a tale about kindness and patience rewarded with a happily ever after. But the real Cinderella story, the one that existed centuries before Walt Disney was even born, is something else entirely. In the original versions, Cinderella does not just go to the ball, she murders her stepmother. Her sisters cut off parts of their own feet. And the ending is not a wedding, it is a blinding. This is the story they buried. And it begins not in a fairy tale kingdom, but in the ancient world. The Cinderella story is one of the oldest tales in human history. Researchers have identified over 345 different versions across Europe alone. But the roots go even further back, over 2,000 years. In ancient Greece, a historian named Strabo wrote about a woman called Rhodopis. She lived in Egypt, but she was not a princess. She was a slave, a courtesan, bought and sold by men. The story goes that while she was bathing by the river, an eagle snatched one of her sandals and carried it through the sky, dropping it into the lap of the pharaoh. He was so fascinated by this small, delicate shoe that he ordered a search across the land to find the woman it belonged to. When she was found, he made her his queen. It sounds almost romantic, but this wasn't a fairy tale. It was the reality of a woman whose entire life was controlled by the men who owned her. And this is the seed from which every version of Cinderella grew. Not a story about dreams coming true, a story about powerless women and the brutal world they were trapped in. Over the centuries, the tale spread across Europe and beyond, to medieval Italy, to the royal courts of France, to the dark forests of Germany. And every time the story was retold, it got darker. In 1634, an Italian writer named Giambattista Basile published a collection of folk tales. Inside was a story called The Cat Cinderella, and in this version, Cinderella is a killer. The heroine is called Zezolla. She is the daughter of a prince, and she has a cruel stepmother. But unlike the Disney version, Zezolla doesn't just sit there and take it. Her governess, a woman who seems kind and caring, whispers a plan into her ear. She tells the girl to ask her stepmother to fetch a dress from a large wooden chest, and when the stepmother leans inside to reach for it, Zezolla slams the heavy lid down on her neck. She kills her. The governess then convinces Zezolla's father to marry her instead. But the new stepmother turns out to be just as cruel. She has 6 daughters of her own. And within weeks, Zezolla is thrown out of her position and forced into the role of a kitchen servant. She is given a new name, Cat Cinderella, because she sleeps beside the fireplace, covered in ash, like a stray animal. This is the first major written version of Cinderella, not a story about patience and kindness, a story about a girl who was tricked into murder and punished for it anyway. 63 years later, in 1697, a French writer named Charles Perrault published his own version. And this is the one that shaped almost everything we know about Cinderella today. The fairy godmother, the pumpkin carriage, the glass slipper, the stroke of midnight. Perrault was writing for the French aristocracy, for the glittering court of King Louis XIV. His readers wanted elegance and charm, not blood and murder. So he took the bones of the old folk tales and dressed them in silk and satin. In Perrault's version, the stepsisters are not punished. Cinderella forgives them. She even helps them find husbands. The story is polite, civilized, refined. But Perrault added something unexpected at the end. 2 morals. The first was simple, that goodness and grace are always rewarded. The second was far darker. He wrote that without powerful connections, without a fairy godmother pulling strings on your behalf, your talents and virtues count for nothing. The system is rigged, and the only way to win is to have someone rig it in your favor. For a story written inside the walls of the French royal palace, that is a remarkably cynical message. But the version that truly changes everything came over 100 years later. In 1812, two German brothers published a book of folk tales that would become one of the most famous collections in literary history. Their names were Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, and their version of Cinderella, called Aschenputtel, meaning the little ash girl, is where the story turns truly horrifying. In the Brothers Grimm version, Cinderella's mother dies at the very beginning. On her deathbed, she whispers to her daughter, "Remain good and kind, and I will look down on you from heaven." Cinderella plants a small tree on her mother's grave. She waters it with her own tears. Every single day, she returns to the grave and weeps. And slowly, the tree grows tall. White birds begin to nest in its branches. And whenever Cinderella needs something, a dress, a pair of slippers, she prays at the grave, and the birds shake it down from the tree. There is no fairy godmother in this version. The magic comes from a dead mother's grave, from grief itself. When a prince announces a grand 3-day festival, Cinderella begs to attend. Her stepmother throws a dish of lentils into the fireplace ashes and tells her she can go, if she picks every last one out. Cinderella calls on the birds. They pick the lentils clean in minutes. But the stepmother refuses her anyway. So the birds provide Cinderella with a golden dress and delicate slippers. She goes to the festival, dances with the prince, and vanishes before he can learn who she is. This happens 3 nights in a row. On the final night, the prince coats the palace staircase with sticky pitch, a dark tar, to trap her as she runs. Cinderella escapes, but her left slipper sticks to the stairs. And now comes the part that Disney will never show you. The prince carries the golden slipper to Cinderella's house. The eldest stepsister tries it on. It does not fit. Her foot is too large. So her mother hands her a kitchen knife and tells her, "Cut off your toe. When you are queen, you will never need to walk again." The girl takes the knife. She slices off her own toe. She forces her bleeding foot into the golden slipper. And the prince, somehow, does not notice. He lifts her onto his horse and rides away. But as they pass the tree on Cinderella's mother's grave, the white birds call out from the branches, "Turn and peep. Turn and peep." There is blood within the shoe. The shoe is far too small for her. The true bride waits for you. The prince looks down. Blood is seeping through the golden slipper. He turns back. Now the second stepsister tries. Her foot is still too wide. So the mother hands her the knife and says, "Cut a piece from your heel. When you are queen, you will never need to walk again." The girl cuts away part of her own heel. She forces her foot into the slipper. And once again, the prince rides away with her. And once again, the birds cry out. Once again, there is blood soaking through the shoe. Once again, the prince turns back. Finally, Cinderella herself tries the slipper. It fits perfectly. The prince looks into her face and recognizes the girl who danced with him. They ride away together. But the story does not end at the wedding. When the two stepsisters arrive at the church, hoping to share in Cinderella's fortune, pigeons swoop down from the sky and peck out one eye from each of them. And as they leave the church, the pigeons return and take the other. The stepsisters spend the rest of their lives in total darkness, blind, not by accident, as divine punishment for what they had done. This is the Cinderella the Brothers Grimm published for the world to read. Self-mutilation, deception, blood-soaked slippers, and birds that deliver vengeance on behalf of a dead woman's spirit. This was considered a story for children, but even the Grimm brothers did not write the darkest version. Across the world, in Vietnam, there is an ancient folk tale that takes the Cinderella story to its most extreme conclusion. In this version, the heroine is murdered by her own stepsister, not once, but several times. Each time she is killed, her spirit returns in a different form: a bird, a tree, a piece of fruit. And each time she returns, her stepsister destroys her again. Until finally the heroine comes back one last time in human form. And her revenge is absolute. In some versions of the tale, the stepsister is killed, and her remains are sent to her own mother, who consumes them without knowing what she is eating. This is not a bedtime story. This is a cycle of murder, resurrection, and revenge, passed down through generations as a warning. So why does any of this matter? Because the Cinderella story was never about glass slippers and fairy godmothers. For thousands of years, it was a story about survival in a world that gave women almost no power at all. Stepmothers in these tales were not cartoon villains. They were real figures in a society where a man's death could leave his children at the mercy of a new wife, a woman fighting for her own children's inheritance, her own family's survival. The mutilation in the Grimm version was not just horror for its own sake. It was a reflection of what women were willing to endure, what they were expected to endure, to secure a marriage, to survive. The violence was never gratuitous. It was the entire point of the story. When Walt Disney adapted Cinderella in 1950, he stripped it all away. The murder, the blood, the dead mother's tree, the self-mutilation, the blinding. What remained was a beautiful girl in a beautiful dress, sitting quietly and waiting to be rescued by a man she had met once. And that version, the safe version, the profitable version, the version that could be printed on lunchboxes and sold as dolls, became the only Cinderella most people would ever know. The real story was buried, replaced with something clean and simple and marketable. But the original tales are still out there, in old European libraries, in folk collections gathering dust on forgotten shelves, in the blood stain that seeps through a golden slipper if you look closely enough. The truth about Cinderella was never lost. It was just buried. And now you know where to find it.